You're in the middle of a perfectly ordinary Tuesday. Maybe you're eating lunch alone, or you're on a bus, or you're folding laundry. And then, without deciding to, you're somewhere else entirely. You're accepting an apology from someone who has never apologized to you. You're having the conversation that should have happened 3 years ago, and this time it goes exactly right. This time they finally get it. This time you say the thing you couldn't find the words for when it actually mattered. And it feels real. Not metaphorically real. Actually, physically real. Your chest does the thing. Your jaw tightens. You feel it. And then your phone buzzes and you're back, standing in your kitchen, holding a shirt, and something quiet follows you out. If that felt less like a description of a quirk and more like a description of your entire inner life, stay with me. Because what's actually happening in a mind like that goes much deeper than anyone usually explains. The first thing worth getting clear is what this isn't. It isn't boredom. It isn't creativity for its own sake. It isn't normal mind wandering. When researchers study typical daydreaming, they find brief, loosely connected thoughts. A flash of what you'll have for dinner. Something that dissolves the moment attention returns. That's not this. What this is something more structured, more persistent, more emotionally loaded. Psychologist Professor Eli Sommer at the University of Haifa spent years documenting people who didn't just occasionally drift into imagined scenarios. They lived there, elaborate internal worlds with recurring characters, ongoing storylines, and emotional stakes that sometimes rivaled anything in their actual lives. He called it maladaptive daydreaming, though that word does the experience a disservice, because from the inside it rarely feels like something going wrong. It feels like somewhere to go. And that distinction matters enormously. Here's the part nobody tells you about. Your brain runs a network called the default mode network, and it has one primary job: generating you. When you're not engaged with the external world, this network switches on. It starts producing your memories, your fears, your projected futures. It's your brain's background process, and for most people, it activates in the gaps: the commute, the shower, the moments between moments. But in some minds, that network becomes the preferred state. The brain starts treating internal simulation as more rewarding than external input. And that's where things change. The outside world starts to feel thin. Real conversations feel slower than the ones inside your head. Real outcomes feel less reliable than the ones you can architect yourself. The gap between what is and what you can imagine starts to feel like an argument the real world keeps losing. This isn't a character flaw. It's a neurological preference the brain developed, usually for reasons that made complete sense at the time. Here's the part most surface-level takes completely miss. People who do this aren't imagining random things. The scenarios cluster around specific emotional territories: control, resolution, recognition, connection. The things that we're missing or unpredictable in real life are exactly the things the imagined world reliably provides. You can rerun the argument until you win it. You can replay the moment someone hurt you, but this time, the ending is different. You can build a version of yourself that people finally understand, finally treat the way some part of you always knew you deserved. And you can do all of it without the thing that makes real life exhausting, which is that real life requires you to be vulnerable to outcomes you cannot control. Real people don't follow the script. Real intimacy involves sitting with uncertainty, with no guarantee the other person stays. The imagined scenario eliminates all of that friction, which is exactly why the brain keeps choosing it. Almost universally, there is a history of some environment being emotionally unreliable. Maybe home wasn't safe. Maybe connection was conditional. Maybe they were simply more sensitive than the world they landed in and learned early that their interior life was more controllable than anything outside of it. The imagined world didn't arrive as an escape from reality. It arrived as a correction to it. But here's what most people miss entirely. For a long time, it costs nothing obvious. The scenarios are private. No one knows. Life continues on the surface and underneath. There's this whole other existence running in parallel. For a while, maybe a long while, that feels sustainable. More than sustainable. It feels necessary. But the brain is always learning, and what it gradually learns is that emotional needs can be met without the risk of pursuing them. Once that's reinforced enough, the motivation to seek those things in reality quietly erodes. Not dramatically, more like the way a path through grass disappears when nobody walks it for a while. You stop initiating the difficult conversation because you've already had it 100 times in your head. You pull back from real intimacy because the version in your mind is so much safer. And then, one day you surface and notice that the life you've been meaning to live has been waiting just outside a door you kept intending to walk through. Not a dramatic reckoning, just a slow realization that the daydream became load-bearing. This is where it stops being harmless. There's another layer that almost never gets talked about. When you're deep in a scenario, some part of you knows time is passing. And when you surface, there's this feeling. Hard to name, like something between guilt and grief. Not because anything bad happened, just because you were gone again. And you knew you would be. And you went anyway. And before you finished processing that, you're already halfway back in. Because the scenario is still there, still unresolved, still offering the thing the real world just made you feel you needed more of. That's the cycle. The shame doesn't stop the pattern. It feeds it. The worse you feel about disappearing, the more you need the place you go to feel better. Here's where most content on this goes unhelpfully vague. Journal more. Be more present. Practice mindfulness. Fine, but that's not a bridge. That's just pointing at the other side of the river. The first move isn't to stop imagining. Trying to shut down the inner world by force is like trying to stop being hungry by deciding hunger is inconvenient. The brain doesn't respond to that. What it responds to is understanding. So the actual first step is this. The next time you surface from a scenario before the shame spiral starts, ask yourself one question. What did that give me? Not as a criticism, just genuine curiosity. Was it control? Was it the feeling of being understood? Was it resolution for something that never got resolved? Because whatever the answer is, that's not a fantasy. That's a need. And needs have real-world addresses, even when they feel like they don't. If the scenario keeps giving you the experience of being truly heard, that's information. It means being heard in real life feels too risky to pursue. That's not a flaw. That's a door. The work when you're ready is figuring out what's making it feel dangerous. You don't have to do it overnight. But you can take one thing the scenario keeps rehearsing and ask whether there's one person, one low-stakes moment, where a version of that could exist outside your head. The imagined world built the template. Reality is just where you test whether it holds. The capacity to build emotionally rich, deeply felt worlds inside your own mind is not evidence of something broken. It's evidence of a nervous system with enormous internal range. These people feel things more fully, process experience more deeply. They built an interior world because they had more interior life than the exterior world had room for. The question isn't how to stop imagining. It's what the imagining is doing that reality hasn't been allowed to do yet. What does the imagined version of connection give you that you haven't let yourself ask for directly? What is the scenario rehearsing that some part of you is still waiting for permission to actually live? The depth was never the problem. Somewhere along the way, you just decided it was only safe when no one could see it. That can change. The same mind that built entire worlds in secret is more than capable of building something real. It just needs to believe it's worth the risk. If you saw yourself somewhere in this, I'd genuinely love to know what landed. Drop a comment below. And if this is the kind of content you want more of, subscribing and hitting the notification bell makes a real difference. I post every week, and I don't want you to miss what's coming. Thank you for being here. See you in the next one.